Today, we are hitting in on some fundamental principles of strength training. I'm here with my co-host, John, and we have a lot of really good information that we want to share with you guys. I know one of the big things that I use during my personal training with all of my clients is breaking down different modules of training. And every time I meet up with people, I always take them through kind of this assessment, I would call it. And I am a big proponent of figuring out where everybody's at. You know, sometimes I'll get clients that are starting off, they already have an exercise background and they're just learning to build strength, or they want to learn how to do a proper squat, or they want to get stronger. And then I have people who come in, they have post-surgery things that they have to work through. And then probably a good 60% of my clients are weight loss clients, which is not shocking. That's a pretty big demographic in my industry. So how do I get started with all of these clients? And what do I do to create the best programming for them? So a lot of what I do is I take them through some assessments, starting out with stabilization endurance. And this is where I take them through purposeful movements slowly, making sure that we can work on form. I start off with a lot of free weights like dumbbells before I would take them up to a barbell. I've also got to make sure that they can even lift a barbell kind of thing. We work on technique, we work on pace, and we make sure that they can handle this kind of specific exercises. Once we go through that, I make sure that we build on their strength endurance. And that can be doing exercises with a little bit more weight, or doing things like back-to-back exercises to work out a specific muscle group. And I remember this past week working on endurance, muscular endurance with my one client, really needs to build up their quads. And so we did squats, and then I did split squats right after, which is like single leg squats with dumbbells. And he was dying. And it was just because we were wanting to work on making sure that our quads can handle more. John, what is something that you do in your specific training that you build up on your strength endurance?
So I do like for endurance type of things, like, I think one thing that you're trying to work on is kind of like a combination, like, when you're doing heavy lifts or just exercise in general, a limiting factor can actually be your cardio. Like, you're like breathing really, really heavy. But if you
Right.
could do, a relatively heavy lift, and then you can move into another exercise. Some people call this like circuit training. You talked about a
Yes.
superset idea. It's not quite circuit training, but it's kind of following the same idea. It brings you to a level of muscular endurance because it's like you're able to, like, when the lactic acid is building up the muscle, the blood flow, you're able to learn to work through that pain and even jump into the
Yes.
next exercise, which
That burn.
it may be you can do similar like muscle groups, like dumbbell, like if you're doing a chest press and then you drop down and you do push-ups, similar muscle group,
Yes.
just a little different. But then if you you can do, like I did this for years, where I would do bench press and then I would go right into pull-ups. And I felt like it was great because having your upper back and your lats really tight for a bench press really
Yes.
helps with the going to stabilization. People often don't think about back strength and tightness, but if you don't have back strength and tightness, you're actually going to limit your ability to do bench press, which most people think of bench press is like chest and
All
tricep.
chest.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's a
but
very full body move.
when I would do the pull-ups, not only would it work at actually just stretching the chest muscles because you're going
Mm-hmm.
through full range of motion, you get that good stretch. Um, but it's working the other side of the muscle groups. So I'm working at, working back, then chest, or vice versa. And but when you do that type of training, it's building up your endurance to continue to do work for longer periods of time, which is kind of that endurance idea. And that's why doing a superset, tri-set, or circuit training, obviously you probably wouldn't start a new client on like, let's do circuit training from the beginning. But like, yeah,
No.
again, going from one exercise to the next, or even if it's not super heavy, having rest periods that are shorter
Yes.
so that they actually are maintaining a level of cardio through the whole workout and you're trying to press that because again cardio can be the limiting factor for some people with the lifts. It's not actually muscular failure. It's just like, oh man, I can't breathe, I need a break. We want to increase
Right.
the endurance of that.
Yeah. And that's what I do with specifically weight loss clients is I definitely push that little bit of a cardio factor and give them as little of a break as possible in between two different exercises is usually where I'll start people. One, to maximize time that they're with me. I want to make sure they get in the most work. If I have them training and following a program without me, I kind of split that up a little bit differently. But when they're training with me, we're definitely weight loss clients specifically working on that cardio factor. If I have strength training clients who are just looking to lift heavy, lower amounts of reps, things like that, I do have to force longer rests so that, they can,
Oh yeah. There's no
yes,
doubt. There's no doubt. Like to me, like at that point, it like, and this is why, for those who are listening in, we wanted to start with how a trainer thinks about training. Because if you said, man, I want to get stronger, they're going to assess, like, but does he have stability? Because if you don't have stability, you can't really optimize strength. Then it's like, do they have just general good muscular development? Because if you don't have
right,
good muscular development, it might be actually good to start with saying, hey, let's pack on a little bit of size first, and then we'll train those muscles to strength. But if you don't have that much, you can actually end up just hurting yourself with strength training. So it's like there's a sequence. So it's like muscular, you have muscular endurance, muscular just development or hypertrophy. And now it's like, okay, now we're ready. We're stable. We've worked up some good endurance because man, if you do heavy deadlifts, which you did the other day, you did
I
a
did.
like a reel on it, which was awesome. You did a great job. Loved your form on that, by the way. Um,
Thanks.
but when you do heavy deadlifts, if you do it right, you're probably out of breath at the end
Yeah,
of that thing. So you need to regather that breath and also feel neurologically. You can almost, it's hard to describe it, but you just feel like, okay, my body feels ready now for another set. If
for
you
another
go back
set.
to it too soon, you're like, my ability to generate force is not there. And
Right,
if you don't have that ability to generate force and you're breathing heavy, you're not going to be able to do as many reps. You're not going to be able to get as strong as you could if you took longer rest periods, which I actually plan on talking about rest periods because there's some dogma around that that's just, I
mm-hmm.
think, really harmful. And also kind of the CrossFit model, which again, I'm totally for CrossFit. I think is an amazing way to get conditioned. But if
Right.
you were trying to optimize strength in a particular lift, it's
CrossFit's
probably
not it.
not optimal. Actually, I'll
Right,
just say it's not optimal for training for strength because you're just not getting any rest. You're going like climbing a rope, trying to do a clean and press, then move into uh, you're getting conditioned. That
right,
muscular endurance is actually probably pretty strong. And man, a lot of those CrossFit athletes have incredible muscular endurance, you
right.
know, but size, normally they're not super big. Some of them can be, but usually they're not. Um, but As far as like strength, though, they wouldn't win probably. And again, some of them do train for this, but they probably wouldn't win in a powerlifting competition because that's just not what
No,
they're training for. It's just a different type of training. But I
exactly.
think one thing that I try to do is I try not to say, this training is 100% bad. I think a lot of people, you can train differently and actually still get to the same goal. But I think we have to be realistic about what is optimal and what is suboptimal, you know? But as
Right.
a trainer, one thing you're looking at is like, okay, your goal is strength, great, but we need to make sure these other things are in place for we can so we can potentiate a strength training phase or regimen.
Exactly, exactly. Doing things like assessing squat form and checking and seeing if somebody has, um, I could get real technical and talk about like upper cross syndrome or lower cross syndrome, which essentially is back muscles not being tight enough to keep your shoulders back for upper cross syndrome. So you tend to hunch forward, which is a huge problem for a lot of people
I just
because
started to like
if
roll
you
my
have
shoulders back. I was like, let me get squared here.
I notice it all the time. But in this day and age, when a lot of people have desk jobs, they're hunched over all the time. Or even if you have like a factory job work, you're hunched over probably some sort of conveyor belt or something like that. And so it's super common. Lower cross syndrome is usually a instability in hip muscles, in your outer thigh muscles, that your knees tend to cave in. People talk about knee issues all the time. And when I have clients that come in and I go through a health assessment with every single one. And constantly I hear I have knee issues. More than likely, I would probably say about 65 to 70% of my clients that say they have knee issues actually have hip issues. And once we strengthen up
Interesting. Yeah.
glutes, yeah, and adductors and TFL band and do some specific work there, their knee pain is little to none. Um,
Wow, that's
I
really
have
cool.
this I have this one client who recently had a knee surgery. So we're working very specifically on her hips, knees, and ankle health because if your ankles aren't good, which is a high possibility for a lot of people, again, it's going to affect your knee. Your knee is the middleman. And so I make her do a lot of leg work with bands on because what it does is it helps support the knee. And she's like, this is, she's like, there's no knee pain when I squat. I'm like, look at that. Because what it does is usually when you work with a band, it helps to engage all of the proper muscles up in the hips, your glute medius on like the outside of your butt kick in, your TFL band, your adductors all kick in, supporting and pushing that band out. So then your knee is properly supported and doing what it's actually supposed to be doing. Um,
So for those who are listening in, clarification, where is this band? Like where can you describe like just break that down a little bit more? So like if somebody says, man, this sounds like me, I want to do this to strengthen, can you describe that? Where
yeah.
the band goes?
Yeah, so where you would place let's say a heavier weighted like leg band, I usually suggest getting a cloth slash elastic one versus just the rubber ones. They're not quite as effective and they roll. But the cloth ones that have elastic woven in, you would place that about an inch above your knee joint. That or right below your knees is also fine if you can't get it above your knee. As long as you are placing it near that knee joint, that's where you're going to get optimal work from your legs, getting those muscles to kick in and sit properly, basically, and
So
engage.
the tension the bands create actually
Mm-hmm.
activate the muscles that you need to strengthen in order to kind of correct these imbalances.
Exactly. Exactly that. And I make people do a lot of band work as warm ups as well, just to get everything activated, warm, create that mind muscle connection, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here soon. Um, and that mind muscle connection is basically when a muscle is like tension, when muscle tension is increased, your brain recognizes it and you feel it. I have a lot of people who struggle to feel certain muscle groups. And usually that is a lot to do with um, they haven't worked that muscle group, so it's really weak. There could be like a neurological pathway issue between the muscle and the brain, or every other muscle group surrounding that muscle group is essentially taking over instead of that muscle. So, case in point, I have a lot of people who struggle with engaging their glutes and their quads take over. And it's called being a quad dominant person, very common because, again, we do a lot of sitting. So, sitting at a desk or something like that, your glutes are stretched out. They're not contracted in like your typical standing formation. And your quads, therefore, tend to become stronger than your glutes. So when you're doing something like a hip thrust, I have people who are like, aren't my glutes supposed to be on fire right now? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, my quads are on fire. And I'm like, okay. So we adjust form or we add a band to get the proper muscles to engage. And then suddenly they start feeling the glutes engage. And so a lot of assessments and working with people and finding where their muscular deficiencies are, that's what I do to create proper
Mm,
programming and to get proper muscular development. Like before development, we have to figure out form. And after we get form down, we get that development down, we get people to learn how to control the weight. Then we move on to building strength and we can do it safely.
yes, yes. So it's interesting. Like, would you? This is pretty, I think, intuitive, but we miss this, especially with some of the dogma in the fitness industry. But people are just like, dude, just be hardcore. You want to get big, lift big. But
Yeah.
like, if you don't have good technique and you're actually aren't don't have the good mind to muscle connection to that muscle group, or recruiting other muscle groups, and then just like, okay, I don't have the mind and muscle connection, I don't have my technique down, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put really heavy weights on me, and I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound really good. That's
And
not what
that's
you want
where
to be doing,
injuries happen.
right? Now, obviously, um, with strength training, you're always going to be working on form. You might
Yeah.
actually lose some of that neurological pathway connection, like where you're like, I'm not feeling it today. I don't feel it, which may come from like systemic fatigue, which it
Yes.
might be a sign of either I need an extra rest day, or I actually need a deload phase, which we'll talk about that in a future episode. But yeah, these are so important. This is why it's good to have a trainer to be able to say, yes, your goal is this, but in order for us to reach that goal, we need to assess these things, get them in place. And if you're doing muscular endurance training, muscular to just development or hypertrophy, you have
Mhm.
developed good mind to muscle connection, but with a percentage of weight that's lower than what it would be for strength training.
Right.
And so you're putting in that time, you're gaining stability, you're actually gaining some muscle size, and now it's like, okay, now let that potentiates the next phase of strength. And then of course in the model, the OPT model, you have another phase after that. I don't know what you know if you wanted to tap on that too, so people can kind of get a holistic
Oh
view.
yeah. The power phase. Yes.
Yes.
So once you get down to working on maximal strength, and again, based off of goals, things like that. So you're getting to bigger lifts, heavier weights, things like that, that you're not necessarily growing muscle size, but you're growing muscle strength. Um, Power. This is the final phase in like the OPT model, which is generally how I do a majority of my programming. There's several other models that you can follow, but this is the one that I generally use for my clients. So I'm most familiar with it. I have found great success with it. Um, so the final phase is power, and I don't have a lot of clients that move into this phase merely because their goals specifically don't touch on this one. Um, but power is strength and speed combined. So you are moving a set amount of weight at a higher amount of speed. And so this would be something similar to pushing a weighted sled, barbell cleans, um, moving quickly and rapidly. A lot of CrossFit falls under this power. And yeah, it's actually my personal favorite type of training. This is what I do for a lot of my stuff. I don't always do strength training. It's a little bit more on the athletic side. And so,
Yeah. I was going to make
yeah,
mention of that. Like, I think this moves into, like, most people are not trying to be a professional athlete. So,
right.
like,
It's
in other words,
athletic training.
their career doesn't demand them running really fast across the field. Unless they're running from bees or something, they're not going to be running like super fast. They're just like, hey, I want to be able to get out and play with my kids,
Right.
jog around. I want to be able to get up. So you have the endurance, they may have physique goals, but if you want to get to the next level of that explosive um, power, being able to move really fast, like, and I used to, I don't know if you struggle with this, Amber, but sometimes I would confuse in this modality um, power as a modality versus like power lifting
Right.
is
They're two different
actually
things.
exactly. And I used to be like, I don't get it. Why would you try to like do squats with weights and actually try to jump? That sounds not too smart. But that's where you're working out with like 30%, of your one rep max, sometimes even a smaller percentile. But the
Mm-hmm.
goal is or no, excuse me, maximal force, sub maximal weight, but as you want to fire that muscle as fast as possible. So you're training
Right.
it to fire, to move fast, which when you take that newfound power, fast twitch, that fast activation of the muscle, and you bring it into strength training, like, so you're at the very bottom of the squat and you're able to fire that muscle fast, you're going to have a better
Right.
drive. So strength training with that power can be really helpful. And I used to only train like how much weight can I lift? And I thought,
Right.
who wants to do 30% of my one rep max? That's lame. I don't care
That's
about doing it.
lame.
I don't want to do box jumps. That's dumb. Why would I do that? But then realizing this actually will help your strength training. It actually helps you
Yes.
coordinate some of these other modalities too. Um, there's a lot of muscular people, bodybuilders, who've actually lost their athleticism
Yes.
because
Because
they
they get
actually,
too big.
yeah, well, some of them actually kept up with their athleticism. So they kept doing power. They kept doing like some of this uh, fast moving, even agility work. So they actually have size and agility. And people are like, whoa, that's an anomaly, which it typically is because guys will
Right.
just, and girls too, for that matter, for bodybuilding, just focus on muscle size that leave off some of these
Right.
other modalities. But again, it just depends on what you're training for. Some people are like, I don't care. I'm just trying to be as big as possible. Well, that's
Yeah.
fair. If that's you, that's totally fine. But for everyday people, and this is good for everyone listening to hear, there are other aspects of health and fitness that potentiate the next phase. And if you haven't thought that through and you're just like, man, I just want to move into heavy squats, but there are muscular imbalances,
Right.
or you're just really out of shape, then there might be some things that you need to work on to kind of get you to optimizing your training for strength. So, wanted to start this episode before we moved into the fundamentals to kind of just lay that out.
Yeah.
So, we're going to jump into some principles for fundamentals for strength training. And I have 5 of them. So if you like numbers, this will really help you. If you're like, oh man, he only gave me 4, and you're like twitching at the end, like, what happened? You're supposed to give me 5. So I'm going to give you 5. I'm not going to miss this out. And it's going to be, I think, really helpful for you. And I also made them parallel so you can remember them. And there will be a test. Just kidding. But
Oh my gosh.
I'll test you,
There's a,
Amber, next week.
there's a test, folks.
Yeah, right.
Panic. Let the
So the
panic
first
ensue.
principle of strength training that you need to get. So we've kind of, set the field for understanding where strength training. Whoo, had a hard time saying that. Where that would fall. But now, how do we approach strength training, here's some fundamentals to think through. The first principle is the principle of functionality. Now, this actually helps us think right about strength training. So a lot of people, again, will kind of mix a couple of different modalities. And when you're training in these different modalities, there's a different thought process or processes behind each of these modalities. For strength, I'm trying to get my body coordinated well enough and neurologically strong in particular movements. Hypertrophy training, you're thinking about muscle groups getting bigger.
Right.
But for power, I'm trying to think, and you can think about muscle groups, but I think it's better to think, and this is my opinion, I think it's better to think about movements over muscle groups. Now,
Yes.
movements include muscle groups, but we want to think about, like, how does the body move? And so how's the body function? This is the principle of
Right.
functionality. And then I'm going to build up my program based on how the body functions. And I want to make sure, just like you don't want, if you're doing hypertrophy, you don't want to focus on just a few muscle groups and neglect others. Like
Right.
I'm just going to do bench press, abs, and biceps, everything I could see in the mirror. That's all I'm going to work. Which how a
Yeah.
lot of guys start off. They're like, I want chest, I want abs, I want biceps, and then they, as you said,
They
they
forget
neglect
about
the back.
everything else.
Yeah, the shoulders start to cave forward and everything. It's not a recipe for success. And the same is true with strength training. You want to think through, okay, what are the movements? What are the movements that I need to focus on? This could be really helpful. So what are the key movements? There are at least 5
Right.
functionality movements: push, pull, squat, hinge, and core. So push obviously could be several different ways of doing that. You could think of a push like a bench press would be a push.
Right.
Shoulder press would be a push movement. In my current regimen, I do weighted dips, which would be a push movement.
Right.
You can do several different push movements in one training, strength training mesocycle. But generally speaking, you want to have one core movement. Like, I'm trying to get stronger in this area for push. And if you're starting out, I want to say which push movement is going to be actually allows you to lift the most amount of weight.
Right.
So like surely you can do an incline barbell bench press, which is great. You hit that clavicular pectoralis, but that's a smaller muscle group in comparison. And so
Right.
if you're doing flat bench, you're going to recruit more overall muscle size in groups to be able to
Yes.
generate force.
You're
So
going to get a
again,
lot more compound work in that.
now, yeah, exactly. Now there's a place for, like, if your bench press goes stale, like you've been doing it for a long time, it's been in your regimen and you've plateaued, it might be good to actually shift to, like, hey, I'm going to shift to an incline press and I'm going to get some of these other muscle groups, target them to get them stronger. So that when I come back to bench press after a couple of weeks, you have a stronger upper chest, your shoulders are probably stronger. It
Right.
activates your triceps a little bit differently. And then when you come back, you actually might be able to move your numbers up on just flat bench. But anyways, you want to pick
For
that
sure.
core lift for push, pull, like a row movement or like a pull up, squat, which obviously could be just the squats, but that could be high bar, low bar. It could be a front squat. It could be a leg press. Kind of follows that same pattern of
Right.
lift. Hinge movement, so that would be like a deadlift, and some people will even train like straight leg deadlifts for power. That's obviously not the best way to optimize the most amount of force, but if you're like,
Right.
but I want to try to get stronger in the straight leg deadlift, you could use that in a strength training mesocycle. And then like a core movement. And when you're doing all these exercises, like when you do a squat, when you do a heavy
You're
deadlift,
using core.
oh my
A lot
goodness,
of core. That's one of the best things you can do for your core is squats.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. I like to add a little just direct core work and actually using weights to do so in the same basic rep range. Now, I don't do just like 3 to 5 reps for core. It's just kind of, there's certain muscle groups, because of the muscle fiber that it is. Slower
Right.
twitch muscles.
Requires more repetitions.
Yeah, like so if you're doing like a lateral raise, you're not really going to do power with that. Like lateral raises
Right.
with 80-pound dumbbells, probably doing a lot of cheating if you have that much weight, but it's just there's not a
Full
high
body.
level, there's not a good amount of leverage for lateral raises. Now, you can do a
Right.
shoulder press, though arguably shoulder presses hit more of a front delt than a side delt when it
Right.
comes to activation. But yeah, you want to try to say, what are the movements that are going to overall make me neurologically stronger? And yes, you can train in some of these subcategories to get stronger in too, and we'll touch on that. But what I
Right.
want to get everyone thinking that's listening to this is like, okay, if I'm going to build out a strength training regimen, what do I need to think about first? Well, I just want to have a shift. Don't just
Yeah.
think about muscle groups, think movements. So now if you have these 5 categories, the way I built out my strength training regimen, I have 6 core lifts. I have bench press and dips. So that's that push movement. I have bent over
Right.
rows and weighted pull-ups. That's
Full
the
movement.
pull movement. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. I'm doing just barbell squats, high bar, and that's my obviously squat. I'm doing deadlift as the hinge, and I'm doing captain chair leg raises.
We love the captain's chair. Those are
Oh,
hard.
dude, I like the I can really focus on if I do hanging leg raises, and
Yeah.
maybe this just shows that I suck at hanging leg raises, but holding myself and you can tend to rock a little bit.
Oh yeah.
I'm so I've gotten better over time, but the captain's chair, you have your back braced, so I can just solely focus on the full stretch of that ab wall and being able to bring it all the way up to a full contraction and then
Right.
a slow eccentric. I love doing that for that, and that's kind of my strength training. And you can add weights to that. It's a little bit more difficult, but even like I do like doing abs and thinking, hey, train these like other muscle groups. You don't have to always do 50 to 100 reps.
No. Add
Add
weight.
some weight to it, and
Yep.
it'll respond. Your abs will get stronger, and you might have some aesthetic goals that might change the way you operate. But it's a great way to train. So
Yeah.
that's functionality. Anything you want to add to that?
I was gonna say, just specifically talking core, because that's something I work on a lot for my own personal goals slash physical needs for my back. But yeah, a weighted sit up is one of the best things. I use a decline bench for those, and then I hold a plate right off my chest,
Mm,
and that's the kind of resistance I've had to work up to because like I can do let's see, I usually hold like a 35 and I'll do like 15. And like that's when I like fatigue out and feel the burn and feel the lactic acid working. So learning how to build up certain small muscle groups in those areas, and making sure that you're getting that burn and getting that work and not staying stagnant on that is like super important. Yeah. And
yes,
then
totally.
that rolls right into like taking that like um into like specific I can't even say it, specificity.
You got it. Look at you.
That
Nailed it.
took a little too much.
Yeah.
Um
So you
specificity
have the principle
of
of
training.
functionality. Yep. And then the principle of specificity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'll dive into this one. This is, I think, might be really helpful. So once you figure out, okay, here's the functions, but there are a lot of exercises that you could pick when it comes to
So many.
exactly. So now I have to kind of hone in on, okay, I know these are my functions. I'm going to pick exercises that relate to this. I'm not going to pick too many because if you do too many exercises, you're going to end up like um, Amber, you and I were talking about this earlier, but like if you did bench press and shoulder press and weighted dips, and maybe you did dumbbell press too, and then you try to do an incline press, and you're like, I'm going to try to get stronger in all of these. You're picking
Yeah,
too many exercises, and
too many.
it's like digging a hole that And every time you come in, you're just digging a bigger hole, and your recovery can't fill that hole in after a while.
Right.
So neurologically, you're just beating yourself up. So you got systemic fatigue and localized fatigue accumulating to the point where you're just like, oh, great, I just ruined my mesocycle because I did too much work, too much volume. And
Right.
strength,
And
particularly, strength, you have to be careful about two things. Too much volume can be the enemy of strength training, or going up in your ability to lift really heavy.
right.
And um, too much going too much close to failure. Failure is tremendously good for um, hypertrophy. You need to
Right.
get close to failure. But for strength, you're going for more of a failure of power. Like, I'm going to try to do a number of these, but you're not trying to go to absolute failure. And I think some guys think, if I'm not going to get stronger unless I go to absolute failure. But man, that's really going to cause a lot of fatigue, which we're going to talk about fatigue management here as well. But you want to say, okay, now that I have the functions right, what are the specific exercises I need to optimize my goal? Now, if I was training for a powerlifting meet
Hmm.
and I was going to be testing my strength through squat, deadlift, and bench, then it makes sense for me to actually incorporate that into my training. Do you need those
Right.
3 lifts to actually do a powerlifting, or excuse me, a strength training regimen? No, you don't.
No.
You don't have to have, you can do incline press instead of flat. You can do front squats instead of bar, like back high bar squats or whatever. You can do, instead of deadlifts, you might decide to do something different, like a good morning for a hip hinge type of a thing. And you
Hmm.
can train all of those for strength, most definitely. But it doesn't make sense if I'm trying to train towards a competition. If I'm trying to get
Yeah.
stronger in a particular movement, I need to do that movement. So this is a dumb illustration, Amber. You probably be like,
Oh gosh.
"This is dumb," but seriously though, um, do you play instruments? Are you
Piano.
musical? Okay. I didn't know
Hmm.
if you were not. I'm learning something about you at this
Yes.
time. What do you play?
I'm actually very musically inclined. I just don't do a lot with it. Yeah.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I hear you. I actually minored in music, and but yeah, I
Yeah,
don't do
because you
much.
sing.
Yeah, well, it depends who you ask. My family
Fair.
tells me to be quiet a lot, so I'm kind of thinking like maybe I'm not so good as I think I am. They're like, "Hey, Dad, can you stop?" And Bethany always is like,
That's hilarious.
I really value just quietness in the house. Could you just, so like not even in the shower, they're like, shut up. No, just kidding. Wow. This is free for anybody listening in. This is great.
Free insight.
But by illustration here, like if I really want to get good at playing, I'm just picking this instrument randomly, but if I want to get good at playing the flute, could you see me playing the flute? I probably don't fit that persona of playing the flute.
I'm
Um,
crying.
yeah, exactly. But like, if you really want to get good at that instrument, well, is there other instruments where you have to blow and push buttons or
Trumpet,
cover the holes or whatever? Um,
saxophone.
well, yeah, sure. There's probably some similarities, and the more I do similar instruments, I might get good at playing the flute, but I'm not going to maximize my flute playing
Mm.
unless I'm actually just playing the flute and practicing it, right?
Actually,
And
that
so,
was a really good example.
oh, good. Hey, I feel so
I'm
much better about life
I'm
and
actually
my
proud of
future.
that one.
Thanks for the affirmation. Yeah, but like, you're going to get better at that instrument. Sure, can you become a better musician with multiple instruments learned? Sure, but if you really want to become a master at something, you have to use that particular instrument and play it and play it and play it
Right.
and play it. And so if I want to get ready to do squats, you don't want to do this idea of like, hey, I'm going to do front squats and get really super strong. And so the time that I come to the meet and I do back squats, I'm going to blow everyone out of the water. No, you're
Right.
probably not going to be used to back squats,
Right.
and you're probably going to do really bad. We laugh, but people do this all the time. And there
Hmm.
are people that always try like different variations of the movement. They're like, don't actually do the movement, do variations of it. And I don't think that that is the optimal way to train. Train with the actual
Yeah.
movement and get super strong. Now, when another way of thinking about specificity is that I can train, let me see what my wording for this was, subsystems or component lifts that actually
Yes.
potentiate the strength of that main lift. So for instance, if I'm doing bench press and I'm trying to gain strength there, and let's say I ran a couple of cycles of that and I kept getting stronger and stronger, it's going great. Now I've hit a plateau. I'm like, I just can't get over this. I did a deload, but I'm still
Right.
sitting at the same numbers. You can shift to say, I'm going to get the component lifts stronger, which can
Mm-hmm.
be lifts that have the similar motion. Like if you do a dumbbell bench press, like flat, and you're
Right.
actually training for strength, handling two separate dumbbells, just handling separately, can train my neurological system as well as my stability differently
Yes.
so that I can come back to bench press and actually be stronger. Even though I may not be lifting as much as a barbell press, it
Right.
can actually make me get stronger. But then also thinking like, hey, what does bench press hit? So it's hitting your chest, it's hitting your shoulders, and it's hitting your triceps. So some will say, let me strengthen my shoulders. So they actually incorporate like a shoulder press to get that really
Right.
strong, as well as in triceps is a huge driver for bench strength.
Right.
Like if you could do like a JM press or a skull crusher where there's a really controlled eccentric, but
Yeah.
the concentric part is actually explosive. You want to explode
Yes.
through. Well, it's helping you. That's going to translate into generating force, especially you probably done this when you've done bench press when you're lifting the bar off your chest and you hit that mid sticking spot. You're like,
Yes. Oh my
man,
gosh. That was
this
so
it's not
frustrating.
moving. Yeah,
I actually
tricep.
had to bail out of a bench press this past week.
Oh,
And
am I hitting a sore spot here? You're like, oh yeah. We've all
yeah,
been there.
no.
We've
Yeah.
all been there.
I was like, oh my gosh. But
We
yes,
should
having
do a video how to get unstuck if you didn't have a spotter, which you should have a spotter. But if you how to get
I was gonna say, if
unstuck,
you're going heavy, you should have a spotter for sure.
yes,
But actually, we should do a video on bales. Yeah.
actually, it's probably a pretty smart idea. But um, I lost my train of thought. What was I
No, we were
saying?
talking sticking points,
Sticking points. Yes,
explosive. Mm-hmm.
when you stick midway through a bench press, it's actually once you get past midway, it's actually a lot of tricep force to lock it out.
Yes. Yes.
And so being able to train that. And then some people do actual like there's exercises called lockouts where you're setting up, where the weight is caught by, a safety measure. You might have like a one of those squat racks where you can set up racks inside. You can set up a bench to where the bar stops at the racks and you're just
Yep.
pressing from that moment. Some of that training can help, but these are subsystems. These are component lifts that help facilitate. But I would say, though, that's not primary. Primary is
The
specificity. I'm going
actual
to train the
movement.
actual lift. But when that
Yeah.
plateaus, I can think of subsystems and say, let me do a mesocycle where, yes, I'm still doing bench press, but I'm going to try to get stronger in my triceps. I'm going to try to get
Right.
stronger in my shoulders. Those are the main ones for a mesocycle. So then when I come back, to bench press. The thing is that you don't want to train component lifts as your primary, especially if you're heading towards a meet, because you're not going to be able to have enough time to translate that newfound strength into the bench press movement. Because it actually takes a couple of weeks of getting back in the groove of things,
Yes.
like neurologically activating the muscles in the way that would help generate the most force. But yeah, so you can do similar movements. You can do muscle groups that contribute to that specific lift, as I was talking about. But this is the basic idea of specificity. So I got my functionality. Here's how my body moves. Here's specificity. These are the exercises I'm picking to get stronger. Here's why, because it aligns with my goals. So
Yes.
for me, I don't have a powerlifting meet, so the reason why I pick some of the exercises I am doing is I do want to get stronger in the main lifts, but also I'm trying to move my body better. So I
Hmm.
have weighted pull-ups and weighted dips. That's going behind some of the decision making. So I have greater level of specificity. And as you learn this type of training modality, your specificity is going to get better. That's
Yes.
why it's actually good if you're starting out to have a coach that can help you pick the exercises. And you may not know the reasoning behind it, but they're going to have specificity in their
Yeah.
mind. If they could say it
Yeah.
right, Amber, you have to be able to say
You
specificity.
know
No.
what? I'm literally gonna, after this, I'm literally just gonna stand in the mirror and repeat that word until it comes out smoothly and I'm not tripping over
Sometimes the more I
myself.
practice, then when I get in front of the camera, like specificity.
Hey,
Ask Bethany.
we
She
all have our hiccups. There's certain words that are all struggle buses for us. And that's
struggle
one.
buses. Did you
You
say
never
struggle
heard of
bus?
that? Yeah,
No, I
struggle
have.
bus.
It's been a long time. I'm going to use that today.
That's a regular part of my vocabulary.
Have
I'm
you
on the
ever
struggle bus today.
have you ever heard like a word or a phrase you're just like, I like that. I'm using it today, and you try to find a way to insert it in. You do that.
Yes.
Even if it doesn't make
You're
sense
like,
to you. No,
I just need to be able to use this either to
yep.
sound smart or because it's funny. Yeah, 100%.
That's what I do. I'm just like, wow, that is a big word. I would sound so intelligent if I used
I
that word.
really expect to hear later that you used that phrase with one of your kids later.
Oh,
And your
struggle
wife
bus.
messages me and is like, "Really? Did you teach him that?" I
Yeah.
did. That's funny.
Yeah,
Oh my
probably.
gosh.
That's
Oh my
funny.
goodness. I love it.
So, for those listening in, I have taken a long time on this principle, and
Oh,
so
you're
we'll try to
fine.
keep other ones rapid fire a little bit more. So, principle
Yes.
of functionality, principle of specificity. Hopefully, that helps you if you're listening in. And number three is the principle of comfortability. Now, this might be
Yes.
confusing because when we train, we're not trying to be comfortable. Like, this
Yeah.
isn't like,
It
oh,
was a
hey,
good word choice.
yes. But somebody might get the wrong idea and think like, "Oh, hey, wow, I'm feeling my muscle burning right now. Should I stop?"
All
No, this
that
is good.
lactic acid.
Yeah.
Yep.
You want to feel obviously one of the key things that we're thinking about training is how do we create the most tension on the
Hmm.
particular muscle groups so that they one, if we're training for hypertrophy, they get bigger. If we're training for strength that they would neurologically get stronger. But what could happen when we're training is that we actually don't feel comfortable because of a number of different things. One, when we're picking an exercise, if this is what the strength training literature would call SFR, and what that is
Yes.
stimulus to fatigue ratio. And so I want to make sure that whatever I choose, I'm seeing more stimulus take place than fatigue.
Yes.
And sometimes biomechanically, that's another big word. Did I sound smart? Um,
Yeah.
but biomechanically, some people will actually, some exercises just don't work for them as well
Right.
for generating force as others. Like, for instance, I am much better at generating force from a leg press. And I don't mean just overall weight, I'm just better at the movement than I am squats. Now, I
Yeah.
work at squats, but every once in a while, I just have to rotate squats off
Hmm.
to where this needs a break because I'm feeling it in my knees, might feel it in my hips. Maybe I need to do your little exercise, your band thing.
Yeah.
Maybe
No,
that's what
you really should try squatting with a band on. I
I'm
promise you,
going to come back and like,
it'll,
you changed my life.
it'll make a huge difference. No, I do the same thing. So for me, I have actually a hard time getting um, stimulus from bench pressing. So what I have done recently is making sure one, I'm warmed up well, because that's a huge thing when it comes to if you are not feeling the burn or your muscle mind connection, like you're not feeling that muscle working. But I'm fatiguing out. So like this past week, I fatigued out at like 5 reps on my bench press, which is not normal for me. So I wasn't having that mind muscle connection. So I dropped myself into some push-ups, and that is what got me like a lot more stimulus in my chest muscles, in my biceps, in my triceps. And that's what actually was doing more work for me than an actual bench press. And that's not my normal, but I think I've been doing bench press for too many weeks, that now I'm not having that same result. And so I have to start switching it up.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. So a couple things to think about this is first, um, when you try new exercise, it can feel awkward, especially if you're
Mm-hmm.
a beginner. So you want to give enough sessions to get that exercise grooved in. A part of that is properly warming up, but also just giving it a number of sessions. And sometimes you may have bad form, and a trainer says, "Hey, you need to make these tweaks." Maybe
Yes.
it's where your elbows are placed, the way you grip the bar, or whatever it is, and it might feel a little bit strange to you. And but if you actually practice that technique, you might actually first drop in the amount of weight you can generate because you're like, "This is
Right.
different. I'm not used to it." But if you have good form, your the technique's right, the tempo's right, you get that um, synced, everything working right, then you can move in. So you want to make sure the exercise feels right, that you get in this really good groove. You also want to make sure the exercise is not beating up your joints. Now,
Yes.
the
Well, that's
truth is,
huge.
yeah, the truth is when you do strength training, short term, you are going to have joint stress. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
done after, especially when you're lifting really heavy. You might get up the next day and feel like, ooh, the joints from my knees feel really sore. That's actually normal. But
Yes.
if it's actually a significant amount of pain, then you're probably not doing something right. You don't want to
Right.
have pain, and if you're working through a movement and it's just pain is present, then either for your level of conditioning, you're training too much. You need more rest time, or you might not be doing it right. The
Right.
technique might be off. That's why you're feeling an excess of joint pain. But this is why it's good again to have a bit of a trainer to kind of troubleshoot like what actually may be the issue. But you want to make sure that there's not an excess amount of joint pain. One way to track, I actually like to track when I'm doing strength training is like, what weight did I use?
Yes.
How many reps did I do this for? And how did my body feel when I was doing this? Did I have, low level joint pain, no joint pain? I like to track that because if I look back at my training regimen and I just consistently am having some like issues, then it might be the time to say I need to rotate this exercise out,
Yes.
because you don't want to hurt yourself. Then the exercise, you don't want it to drain more than it actually increases or stimulates the strength of the muscle. So if I'm doing squats but my strength is going down, then again it might be this exercise I've been training it too much, or I'm not doing it
Mm-hmm.
right, or I need a break. But a lot of times, exercise, and this is the way your body works, there's adaptation your body goes through where it's like this exercise is not generating the same amount of growth that it once did.
Right.
And one of the ways that I can continue to potentiate strength gains is actually rotate squats out, put in something like a leg press and
Mm-hmm.
do that for a mesocycle. And then I come back to squats, and now that exercise is fresh again
Right.
and I'm able to train that. That's why you introduce variety. I will say though, for strength training, you want to give an exercise a long enough time to actually be able to track and progress in. If you're like squats
Yeah.
for 2, 3 weeks, you're like, hey, I'm getting tired of this. I'm going to do leg press, and hey, that kind of a little boring. Let's try the hack squat.
Oh, that's a struggle I have with so many clients, specifically ones working on strength, is they
Yeah,
want more variety. And it's like, okay, I understand that you're getting a little bored on certain things, but if this is your goal, reminding them of what they came to me with, then this is the specific exercises we need to focus in on. Usually I say a bare minimum of 6 to 8 weeks before we would like move on and throw in a little bit of other variety. Because if you if you switch around your exercises too much, you are not going to get the strength that you want in those specific areas because you're making too many changes.
Right, right. So here's a couple things, like here's some ideas of keeping or replacing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing the exercise if there's good tension and
Yes.
you're allowed to lift heavier loads, like it keeps going up. Like if your
Yes.
weight is continue to climb, don't you dare change the exercise if that's happening. Now, the next thing's important though. Keep doing the exercise if your joints are actually feeling good. Now, if your weights are going
Yes.
up but your joints are continuing to feel bad, then it might be a good time to either deload, take a couple extra rest days, or actually rotate that exercise off because you want to be in it for the long haul. Not like,
Right.
dude, I just squatted 600 pounds, but my knees are totally jacked for life. That's not
Yeah.
what you want. You want to be able to do this in the long run. And again, you want to keep the exercise if you're growing in strength over the months. And for
Right.
strength training, this is where it gets really boring. Hypertrophy, you actually probably do change out exercises a little bit more. But for strength training, you can actually go for um, months. Like, I
Yes.
mean, there's been times where I've stuck with squats for 6 months or more. I did
Yeah. As long
strength
as it's still
training,
stimulative.
right? So I do a mesocycle. I would peak, I would deload, and I would go right back into another mesocycle. And I was like, hey, I'm still feeling good with squats. No need to change this out. Do another mesocycle, and I may do several of those. And for those who are listening, when I say mesocycle, this is just like an 8-week training regimen or a
Mm-hmm.
12-week. It can be different, but that's a mesocycle in the some technical language they use in the literature to describe a regimen. But
Right.
yeah, I think this could be like super, super helpful for those listening. But you want to have that comfortability, making sure you want to replace exercises if roughing your joints, your strength is just zapped,
Right.
and or if you hit a plateau, you're just like, hey, I feel good, but I'm not moving any further forward. Okay, let's rotate this off. It's gotten stale. Let's
Yep.
rotate some, and which might stimulate the muscles in just a little bit different way, but you might come back to the squat or to the bench press or deadlift later and be stronger. I took a year off of deadlifts.
Really.
Yes, I
Oh,
didn't do any deadlifts at all, and I came back stronger in the deadlifts.
that's amazing. That
Yeah,
does make sense though.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting that. Now, if I was training for a competition for deadlifts, that's probably not the best strategy.
Right.
But I was like, you know what? I've been doing deadlifts for a long time, and I really focused on. I did a lot of um, like good mornings. You know what? Like I didn't take a year conventional deadlifts.
Yes.
I
Conventional.
did take about 6 months off of any type of deadlifts, but a year off of conventional or sumo deadlifts. I did some straight leg deadlifts just to
Yeah.
clarify. But I came back and I thought, can I lift the same amount? And
Mm-hmm.
I was able to actually easily hit my PR, and I was able to move over, and I didn't train in that particular. So you can get neurologically stronger with a variety of different exercises, which can be really
Yes.
helpful. Now, would I be as strong if I was just trying to get strong in deadlifts? I probably would be stronger if I had that whole year training on deadlifts. I probably would be
Right.
further. But again, that wasn't the goal in hand. So I was able to lay that aside. That's the principle of specificity. And then we just covered the principle of comfortability. Anything else you want to say in relation to that as a trainer?
No, no, I think you hit all of the really good points. And again, like if you are feeling like you're not getting the stimulation from an exercise that you should be, then it's time to switch it up or time to figure out why that you're not
Yeah.
and moving on. Um, the next principle that I feel like we should touch on, John, is like the principle of consistency. This one is very important in like in your programming and in your strength building. So go ahead and touch in on this one.
So consistency in, like, we want to check some boxes here that are
Mm-hmm.
like consistently in place. it's not necessarily a rule, but you want to use, like if you're strength training, remember we're going back to functionality.
Yep.
Okay, I'm trying to get stronger and push. And so I want to use the most muscle so that I can produce the most amount of force. That makes sense.
Yes.
Again, there are exceptions where you move out to accessory work to strengthen the main lift for a time. But like if I want to get better at bench press, I want to do bench press. But I also want to say, hey, let me lift this so that it actually recruits the most amount of muscle, like for instance, and generate the most amount of force. So if I do a bench press and my elbows are flared out,
Right.
I actually have not positioned my back in a position to generate the most amount of force. Like my shoulder blades aren't pinched back to give myself that stability. And also, the way I have my shoulder placed, it's putting it in the most weak position possible.
Correct.
So what I want to do is I want to line that bar up with where the biggest most amount of muscles are actually being able to generate the most amount of force. So I
Right.
want
So
to be
like
able
right
to,
over the middle of your chest. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And then I want to stack my joints, because if I'm lifting the weights but my elbows are out, I have too close a grip, my elbows are out. Well, going from, for those who are like watching on YouTube, you won't be able to see this if you're just listening to the podcast, but if my elbow is out and I'm trying to push the weight up, I'm not going to be able to generate as much force. I haven't stacked
Right.
my joints. But if I could stack my joints, so I'm thinking about like my elbow to wrist, where's my elbow in relationship to my shoulders, and am I aligned appropriately so I have the most amount of muscles activated where it can generate the most amount of force. You want to
Yep.
check all those boxes. Again, another good reason to have somebody to kind of coach you and watch you, or at least record what you're doing so you could see it, or have someone comment on like, hey, here's how you can change some things.
Yes.
But if you can be consistent with, I do the same type of form,
Yep.
I the same amount of muscle groups. So you think of most muscle, best leverage, which deals with stacking your joints the appropriate way, the same technique every single time. I want to make sure that I'm stable and I'm braced for every rep. This is huge on
Oh
squats.
my goodness.
My
Yes.
goodness. Like me getting the rep versus not getting the rep can actually be determined if did I brace myself right. So you'll see guys that are really good at this, when they unrack the weight from a squat, they do it the exact same way. The way they step back, their
Yep.
stepping back pattern is planned. Like if they take an extra step more than they normally would, it drains them because
It
they're
throws
lifting
them
so
off.
right.
Mm-hmm.
The way they kind of, you'll see them kind of almost like screw their feet in a little bit. They're trying to say, do I have really good stability? Then they'll get that deep breath, and then they suspend it in. And
Yes.
if you're lifting really heavy, you probably want to use a weight belt. You have that weight belt around you. That weight belt is not really to kind of like, ooh, it's extra padding for your back. It's actually more for spinal neutrality. So I get that
Yes.
deep breath in. My spine is reaching that place where it's healthy. I'm also braced. The air is braced there. I'm holding in the breath. Then I go into the hole, and then I come up and I let the breath out.
Yes.
But all of that is technique, but I want to do it the same way every single time. If for one set, I get that breath suspended, I go down, and then I come up and I let it out. And then the next time I get that breath suspended, but I let it out at the very bottom.
Oh,
That change, like I
yeah.
get to the bottom, like, oh no, I'm
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
Seriously
Getting up
though,
is going to be nearly impossible.
you're
Mm.
losing
Yeah.
power because you didn't brace yourself right. You're losing power because you didn't stack your joints right. You're losing power because now, instead of um, positioning yourself where you're using the most amount of muscle, you've angled it a little differently now to where it's not working the same way. Or somebody will do like, they'll start off great and they're doing bench press. We're using a lot of bench press illustrations here, but I've seen this happen. Guys, they can ego lift when this happens. Like the bar will touch their chest,
Yeah.
they'll lift it up, but then as they start to progressive overload, their desire to lift more outpaces their desire to be consistent with technique. And so now they're no longer touching their chest. It's like 2 inches above. But they're like, oh, but hey, I got my reps in. No, you really did.
I think one
That
of
did count.
my favorite
And
things to see at the gym is people who do like half repetitions just to have the weight.
oh my goodness, yeah. I
Mm,
saw this guy at the gym the other day. He did squats. It might like the amount of weight that he did just to walk it out was impressive. I was just like, hey, he
sure.
walked that out on his back. That's a lot of weight. But he was shaking. I was like, this is disaster. What is he doing? But all he
Right.
did was like, I think he went down like 2 inches, like, and
Yep.
then
A
like
lot of
back
people
up.
do that.
But they think, hey, if I lift big, I'm going to get much stronger. But they would be so much more served if they were full range of motion, good technique.
Hmm.
Um, like not only would it help them stay in the game the long term,
Hmm.
because hey, sure, if you can do 600, 700 squat, but you're only going down a couple inches, that okay. But if you can get to the place where you're doing that full range, it'd be
Right.
better for you to do 315 or something like that full range than try to do 500 and do a short amount of range. You're going to get so much stronger, and it's a long-term strategy. It's going to be so much better. But yeah, I cringe so often when it says you want to
Yeah.
be consistent on that. And then it's also important, like if you're doing deadlifts, these are little things, but if you're doing deadlifts, if you're going to use straps, stick with straps the whole time.
Yeah.
If you're going to use chalk, stick with chalk. If you're going to use squat shoes, use squat shoes the whole time. Don't go from flat foot to bare feet to squat shoes to
Right.
all of that is going to affect your level of progress in the long run. So you want to I want to
Yes.
be consistent. I'm going to set out the rules. This is true of hypertrophy too, because you might start off with like, hey, I'm going to pause at the bottom of every rep. Well, good. We'll do that for your whole mesocycle though, because now
Yeah.
you can track, am I actually going up in weight, reps, volume? You're able to track it better. If it's always inconsistent, you're going to limit your ability to track. You're probably going to end up hurting yourself. Just not the way to go.
Yeah. And
So
that's one of the things I do. I have a weightlifting client right now, and she is just trying to go heavy as possible. She's not entering a competition, although I'm trying to convince her to. And we've gotten kind of stuck on her squat depth. So her new mesocycle is having us do pause squats and working on depth and powering out from the bottom. Because once we can work on her range of motion increasing, now obviously I've taken her weights down and we've increased the range of motion so that she can build up strength in that larger range of motion. So when we go back into strength building, she's going to have a lot more power coming out from a lower angle, and we're going to be able to increase her weights more effectively so that she can lift heavier in a squat and her form's even better.
yeah, that's great. I
Mm-hmm.
do like, obviously, like for like in competition training, like they actually want to make sure that you hit depth right. And sometimes some competitions actually demand that you have a pause, like you're
Yes.
doing a competition. And again, these are competition rules. You don't have to have the exact same rules as competition, but there is some legitimacy of like the reason why they have these rules is to actually show that you actually can lift this weight. You went all the way down. You were able to pause the weight. Then you were able to generate the force to get it up. You did this. It wasn't momentum. You didn't just flanangle. Is that a word? Flanangle? What's the word? Finagle your weight up.
Finagle. I was like,
It's
what word are
like,
you looking for?
my for
Finagle.
those who are listening in, my intelligence level just went down. I got specificity though, so that's good. But
1 for 1 today.
stop
Good job.
laughing at me. Oh, that's
Mm.
good. Yeah, actually, it's good to be able to laugh at yourself. That's another episode.
Yes.
The last principle, for those who are listening, and you've done a great job. We've gone over an hour. The
Oh
last
gosh.
principle that you've all been waiting for is the principle of scalability. Now,
Yes.
this is important because with strength training, the fundamental of strength training is you're trying to get stronger. So you should be seeing the weight go up.
Yes, consistently.
Hypertrophy, the measure of progressive overload is not necessarily just weights. It can
Mm-hmm.
be reps. It can be volume.
Yep.
But it also, hypertrophy does include you getting stronger. But for strength training, that is your specific goal. So you're not really going up in rep range the entire training mesocycle. You're not going up in rep range. You're not going up in rep range. So you're saying I'm sticking, like, let's say for this one, and it can range here, but let's say you're doing 3 reps for squats. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
do that for the entire time. Like I might, at the very end, unless I'm doing peak weeks, I might say, hey, I'm getting ready to go on a deload. So I might push myself a little bit more, but I'm generally going to push myself not by reps going up, but weights going up. So that is what you want to be able to scale. So your goal is to lift a little bit more weight every session, or at least match the same weight that you did last time with
Right.
better technique. Like for
Yes.
instance, like right now I'm going into week, I think 5. Yeah, week 5. And I did have it was a bench press exercise. So that lift, I actually matched the same weight because I felt like the week beforehand, I was like, my last set, I didn't feel like I had perfect form.
Right.
Like I
So
had a
you want to
little
work
bit of,
on that.
yeah. So for me, you do want to have glute activation. And when
Yes.
you're doing powerlifting bench press, it's important to have the lower body tense and tight. A lot of people don't think that, so they lose actually drive
Yeah.
in the bench press. But like I did something, you can overactivate the glutes where it comes off the seat
Right.
just a little bit. And I'm a stickler for keep your backside on the seat because you can end up compromising the spine lifting that backside off the seat and you're
Right.
lifting a lot of weights. Not always the case, but I'm tracking that. I'm like making sure that I come down all the way, the bar touches my chest, but I'm also, when I generate that force, that I'm not doing anything that's out of, but I just went a little bit out of what I should have. And so I was like, when I came back, I did the same amount of weight, same amount of reps, but I did it with better form. But
Mm-hmm.
that's an improvement.
Right.
But generally speaking, you want to try to each session move up in weight all the way through that mesocycle and train there. Last thing I'll say with this scalability, one way to scale all the way through a mesocycle is actually to plan doing max effort lifts, which is your normal strength training thing, but then also training dynamic effort lifts, which is actually training for power. So
Yes.
you're doing maximal effort, submaximal amount of weight, but you're just training that explosive aspects. And what I like to do is when I'm doing strength training, I don't plan all my dynamic training days, but if I just feel like, man, I'm supposed to do squats today, but I'm still feeling it from my last squat session, instead of just taking an additional day off, I actually might say, hey, I can potentiate recovery, but actually just getting the movement. You know how you start to move and get warmed up, you feel better?
Yes.
It actually potentiates recovery, but you can do that dynamic training where you're doing warm up, but you're doing not as heavy, but just working on that explosive aspect, which
Right.
can potentiate your max effort lift the next week. So that's a method. That's not necessarily going up in weight, but you're potentiating the next max effort. So it's
Right.
scalable. But if you stack all of these, just in summary, if you stack all of these and think, okay, functionality, I want to make sure that I'm thinking movements, not muscle groups.
Mm-hmm.
Specificity, here are the specific exercises
Making sure
that
you're
I want to
staying
get
on
stronger.
goal.
Comfortable, right. Consistent with my form, technique, that's all in place. And now I understand what scaling looks like all the way through the mesocycle.
Yes.
These are the fundamentals, no matter how you approach strength training, which there's many different strength training styles out there. But these fundamentals have to be in place for you to optimize your strength training. So hopefully those
Yeah.
listening in, this was helpful to kind of give some framework. So if you want to head into this mesocycle, you'll be prepared to do so.
Yep.
Any
And this
last thoughts, Amber?
Yeah. I just hope like people can kind of get a good grasp on like what good programming looks like. Also like what you can be looking for if you do work with a trainer. Like, are they using things like techniques and um, modalities and principles like this in your programming? I think like that's super crucial to knowing like if you have a good trainer, do they have this going for you? Do they have you planned out for a couple of weeks? Do they help you see your big goal and then reverse engineer it back to how they program you out? And there's good trainers, there's not good trainers. I'm not going to like point people out, but just know that if you have a specific goal, find someone who's going to help you get you there and is going to help you get you there the most effective way and the most safe way and teach you things. I think when I had my own personal trainer, I learned so much from her. Like it was extremely helpful in my own personal journey. I had hit a plateau in like my strength and my knowledge, and getting somebody else's perspective and help can absolutely be the biggest game changer in your fitness journey. So I just think these principles and modules are super helpful and will get you to where you want to go.
100%. For those who are listening in, I do want to give this invitation. One, if you're looking for someone to train you, Amber does coaching. She does some online coaching as well. And I think she does have a few slots available. Now, interesting, you move into this time of year, a lot of people are thinking like, hey, I want to make sure that I don't gain 10, 20, 30 pounds through the holidays, things like that.
Holidays.
It's nice to have somebody to kind of keep you accountable, keep you on track. Um, Amber has a few openings
I do.
for you for training. So if you're interested in that, that'd be fantastic. But also just reach out to us. We're available to help you. And if there's any content that you would like us to cover related to this or have a question about strength
We would
training,
love to hear back about that.
100%. We are here to provide the best information, up to date information as possible. And then also, I'm excited in the coming weeks, we'll be interviewing some strength training coaches.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. I'll give you some more information about that in the next episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. You guys have a great day. See you later.
Bye.